thanks for joining me for my Monday mashup. I'm Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in the UK. Today I want to share with you this card here. So we are using a bit of a mashup of techniques and various combinations to sort of get the overall effect of this card here. Now this background was designed by Bruno Bertucci, who created this some while back to use up our scraps of paper, etc., to actually make use of them rather than throw them away, which we normally would. So it's a really great technique. I've just taken it in a slightly different direction in the sense that I've done some embossing panels and I've also done some stamped panels, which I'm going to show you how to do initially, so that you can see how it all sort of came together. So I'm going to start off with the technique for the actual leaves, because I want them to have a little bit of time to dry. If I hold that a little bit close to the camera, you can see sort of how the different colours are on the leaves. It's quite a cute technique to do because it's quite hard to normally colour onto a dark background, so it's just something a little bit different really. So I'm going to pop that to one side. And you need to take a scrap of your base card. So in this case, I'm using Merry Merlot, and I haven't been drinking, I promise. And I'm going to be using the stamp set called Beautiful Autumn. This is a really lovely set. I have used it quite a lot with various things on my blog. I just think it's one of those really lovely versatile sets, and at this time of year with autumn upon us, certainly here in the UK, it's a really lovely one to use. So we're going to create our background first, and then we are going to move on to actually put the card together. So I will start this off just to show you the technique, and then I will finish it off camera and come back to show you how it all goes together. So the first thing we want to do is we need to take our stamps. So I've used two of the leaves and the pine cone and also the acorn. If you want to, you can use fewer. In fact, I think I'm going to take the pine cone out on this occasion, just so we've got one less to colour. But the technique is basically the same. So these are the three steps we'll be using. We're going to be using gold embossing powder, and we're also going to be using our Versamark ink pad. So this is our watermark stamp pad. This has got glycerine in it, so it will hold on to our actual embossing powder for us. So what I want to do is I'm going to start off by stamping a background. Now, when I did the original of this, I did leave some gaps between all my pieces, which I'm going to do again, but I'm going to do them closer this time, because the actual card, once you actually cut them up, you do get quite big gaps. So I want to do them a bit closer. Now, the easiest way to achieve this is because we are using our watermark ink pad, we can't really see where we're going as we go. So what I'm going to do is every couple of stamps, I'm just going to add some embossing powder, so you can see, I can see now where my stamps are going. And I'm going to concentrate mainly on the leaves with this. I will add a few acorns in as we go, but I just want to really concentrate on our leaves more than anything. So as soon as I can't sort of see where I'm going, if you turn it in the light, I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but you can sort of see where you have stamped. So I'm just going to do a few at a time. So I'm going to continue with this, and then I will come back and show you how to actually colour them. So as you can see, I've stamped all the images now quite close to each other, just so we reduce those gaps there. So now I'm just going to heat emboss the actual gold powder so that we get that nice gloss on it. Okay, so that's now all set. So now we can start actually colouring the actual elements themselves. Now, because this is a very dark background, any colour that you put onto it is just going to disappear into the background itself. It's going to become just sort of a darker shade of what it is now. So we need to first of all put a base down. So for that, I'm going to be using the white Stampin' chalk marker. Now this is a really good marker for adding those sort of highlights if you want to add a highlight to a stamp, or if you want like a chalky background on anything. But it is really, really good for this technique. You can also use the re-inker from the chalk stamping pad. That's also a possibility, but you do need to paint that on, where obviously this is a lot easier because it is just a pen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to colour in all of the elements on this sheet using this marker here. And as you can see, all it does is it's going to lay down a white base. Don't worry if you're going over the gold pieces. We are going to give it a little buff at the end, so anything that's sort of excess on there will come off, and you'll find that some of it will come off as we colour in any event. So don't worry too much about that. And also don't worry too much if you're going into leaving some of the red showing, because that will just add to our autumn leaf colours. So honestly, don't worry about that. So I'm just going to do a few of these just so you can see how the technique works, and then obviously I will go off and complete these off camera, because it does take a little while to do, and I don't think you'll be wanting to sit there watch me do this. So I just want to make sure I've got one of every leaf so that I can show you how they're done, and then we can move on from there. Okay, now normally if I was doing this as a project myself, I would colour the whole lot in, which would give all of the chalk enough time just to actually make sure it's completely dry. I can see this one's still wet where it's the last one I just did, but this first one is now quite dry, so I'm quite happy to actually move on with that. So we're going to be using Stampin' Blends to actually colour this. Now, you can use various things. You can use your ink pads. You want a brush that's really quite dry to add the colour, because you don't really want to be adding any water to this chalk paint, because it actually it will become a bit cloudy almost. So you do want to be a little bit careful of that. So you can use a brush and your inks, provided that you've obviously is quite dry. You can also use your stamping markers, so this could work as well. It's harder to blend the colours, but it is possible, so you could use these as well. But with the Stampin' Blends, because they're alcohol based, they will blend naturally quite nicely. Having said that, when I come to do my tops of my acorns, and indeed when I did the actual pine cones on the original one, I did use a mixture of a stamping marker and my blend. Now, they're not natural bedmates because one's water-based and one's alcohol-based, so they will naturally repel each other. But if you're careful, you can actually blend them as well. So I will show you how to do that. I'm going to start off with our acorn, so I can show you that, and then we'll move on from there. So I'm going to be using for the acorn shell part Granny Apple Green. I'm using Granny Apple Green, although it's quite a bright green. On this dark background, it's sort of the right tone that we're looking for. So I'm just literally going to colour this all over, and again, don't worry if you're going over the gold pieces. When we buff this, it will remove most of the excess, so don't worry too much about that. Now, I've coloured that. We'll go back to this in a second, because you'll see it will go a lot lighter than what it is at the moment. So as you can see, it's quite sort of bright there at the moment, but it will fade, so we might need to go and add a second layer. So on the top of the actual acorn itself, I'm using this is dark cinnamon cider, so this is one of our new colours, and again I'm just going to colour over the top of the actual acorn itself. Now you will find from time to time that it will pick up some of the chalky residue. If it does that, just turn your pen around and you'll see that it will start flowing again properly. Now if you're happy with that, you could leave that. I wanted to add a slightly darker tone, So this is where I added in my stamping marker. Now obviously that's quite unblended, I think is the best expression. But what I'm going to do is now just to bring in my stamping blend again, and I'm going to go over the top of it. And what will happen, it will repel a little bit, but where it settles, it will dry and give you that nice sort of overall effect. So we'll leave that one to dry. And whilst that's drying, I'm going to move on to some of the leaves. So I'll start with this acorn leaf here. So I have used dark mango melody for this, and also the dark pumpkin pie. So finally they're going to have actually a mixture of the cinnamon at the end as well, just to give us that nice tonal colours. Now I'm going to start with the mango melody because this is our lightest colour, so it's easier to blend the others to that, and also you won't dirty your nibs too much. So I've added some mango at the top. I'm then going to add some pumpkin pie. And I'm going to quickly just go back over where they meet with that mango melody again, and it will just blend those colours together nicely. I'm then going to add my cinnamon cider to the base. And again, I'm going to take my pumpkin pie just to blend those two in together. Now, I don't know if you can see fully, but the whole sort of leaf then starts taking on a new effect. If you go over the edges with your chalk marker like I've just done here, just add a little bit of colour to it. It will just take that away from that edge. But honestly, once it's all sort of made up, you won't notice it anyway. But there you go. So that's your oak leaf. And again, we might need to go back over and do another layer. It just depends on how much the chalk actually comes through, because it tends to come through on the lighter colours more than the darker ones. But we'll let it dry and then we can have another look at it. So again, I'm going to start the same with the sycamore or maple leaf here. Just going to do the tips of those leaves. I'm going to blend in some pumpkin pie. As I say, it feels like sometimes the pens stop working. It's just whether it picks up a little bit of the chalk. But if you just turn it over, it will start blending again. And again, just add in some of the cinnamon. And some of the orange just to blend that through. And obviously autumn leaves are very random anyway, so it doesn't matter sort of how much. You might want to add some more orange to one of them than the actual brownie colour. It's entirely up to you. You can add whatever you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to complete the whole of this sheet. So it takes a little while, obviously, but once it's done, you'll see how sort of nice it can all look together. So I'll get that done and then I'll pop back to show you how to put it together. Okay, so as you can see, I've now coloured all of these in. It actually doesn't take too long, and you don't need to be too precise to it because you're adding these colours just to create an autumn leaf effect, so you don't need to worry too much. So we're going to start now putting it together. So we've got our card base here, which is a standard C6 card, and I've done it as a landscape format. So this is your full A4 length of card, measured by 10.5 centimetres, and then scored at 14.85 to give you your card base. We then have a piece of the beautiful brush metallics. You can choose, there's 3 different colours in that pack, so you can use basically any one because we're using a mixture of the strips through here. And this is 13.35 by 9.5 centimetres. And then you want another piece that's just the same size as your base, so that's 13.35 by 9, and that is in the Merry Merlot. Now this is the same size as at the moment. I tend to do it just a bit bigger than I need it, because then I can trim it all and it all becomes really neat when it's all trimmed up. So that's why I do that slightly larger, okay? So this is going to be our piece that we're going to build on. I've also got another piece of Merry Merlot, and I have used the Tasteful Textile embossing folder just to give it a really light sort of texture to it. It just adds that little bit of detail really. So that's what I've used on there. And I'm going to take my little trimmer here, and I want to cut myself some strips. Now I tend to do it as I go along, but the first thing I need to do is to lay down some glue. Now you can use wet glue. You can cut your strips and use wet glue. I tend, for this demonstration, I tend to use just our Stampin' Seal. Now this is just a roller of glue, but it just, I find it's so much easier to hold everything in place. So I put it sort of quite liberally over the base of my actual card so that I can start putting it together. So the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to line that up so it's nice and neat. That was left over from my first one that I did. So what you want to do is you want to cut yourself some strips. So normally if you were using scraps you would just use whatever you have, but I'm just going to cut at any angle strips of card. So I'm going to start off with my embossed panel. Now I'm just literally letting it run over the ends, and I'm also making sure that it's sort of stuck down in place really. So we're going at different angles. I've also got some strips of our metallics. So these are the 3 metallics that we have in the brushed set. They're absolutely beautiful. I love these. And I'm just going to use them quite randomly really. So next to my first piece, I'm going to add a strip of my metallic, just making sure it butts up nicely. Whoops, gets stuck to me. I'm then going to take my piece of my leaves, and I'm going to do exactly the same. So I want to just cut it at an angle. Notice I'm not lining anything up, I'm not measuring anything, I'm literally doing it as we wish, just lining it up, sticking it down. It really is that simple. So I'm just going to put another metallic strip. I will just take a pair of scissors and just snip that off there so that I know I can use that second piece. I'm then going in again with a strip of my embossed piece. Now I know, because I have no pattern direction on any of this, I can mix and match sort of which way up it goes, so it's not so regimented. If you were using a paper that had a directional pattern, then obviously you'd have to look a bit more carefully at that. But as I say, I'm not, so I can get away with this quite well. So again, I'm just going to cut myself another strip. So it really doesn't matter. Just line them up and break them up with these nice metallic strips. Okay, so I can put that to one side for now. Just going to cut that metallic strip off. We can use that on another one. So now, as you can see, that's all covered. I tend to use this as my base because I think it's the easiest way to actually sort of get it to build up easily, rather than try and stick it onto another piece that's going to sort of stick out a little bit. So I'm going to take my trimmer here. I'm going to turn it upside down for my first cut because I want to try and make sure that I take all of my pieces off the end plus a little bit of that base, because remember I made it that bit smaller. I'm just going to have a look on the other side to see sort of where I want to cut, and I think what I'll do is I'll take a piece of that off there. Okay, and then going to, now remember this was 9 centimeters that I wanted this to end up, so I'm just going to move it over past there to the 9. Now if you don't quite get on there, that doesn't matter. So I beg your pardon, I need this 8.5, so I need to actually take a bit more off of that. And again, look, you could use that on something else if you wanted to. Okay, so now it's just my length that I need to trim. This is not quite big enough, this little trimmer here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pop it onto my other trimmer. So this now measures 12.85 by 8.5. So that is just going to give us that little border of all of our metallic showing when we place it on our card here. Okay, so I'll put that to one side. The next thing I want to do is to actually stamp my greeting. So I'm going to do that next, and for that you'll need a further scrap of your Merry Merlot cardstock. So I'm just using any scrap out of my little box here. Now again, I'm going to be using the Versamark ink pad with the gold embossing powder, but this time I'm using the stamp set Ornate Thanks. So this is a really great set because it's got thank you, so grateful, and thanks, but it's also got all those little words that you can add. So you can say thank you ever so much. I wasn't sure how to thank you. So you can build up your own sort of phrases, which I find it really, really useful. But for this one, we're going to use thanks, and as I did on the original, for all you do. Okay, so I'm going to stamp the original thanks first. So I'm going to stamp this up here, because then what I can do is trim it afterwards once I'm happy that everything's in the right place. And again, I'm just going to add my embossing powder at this point because I can't actually see where I need to stamp the rest of my greeting. So once I've got that, and you can move it to wherever you want to. So I'm going to go off the end a little bit there. So there you go, you've got thanks for all you do. Okay, so I'm just going to heat that now just to set it so that we're ready to move on. Okay, so I'm going to trim that in a moment, but the first thing I want to do is, when I spoke to you when we was originally doing our actual leaves, I wanted to explain to you about buffing. So where we've done our leaves, if you just buff them really lightly with either a kitchen towel, or I'm using like a J-cloth type thing here, it will just buff up that gold. Don't do it too much because then you'll tarnish it, but you just want to just give it a little rub, and that will just make those stand out just that little bit more. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to trim my greeting. Now what I did is I left it quite close at this end, but I left a bit extra so that I could add my leaves here. So I'm going to do the same again. And again, I didn't really measure this, I just kind of went by eye, but just as a guide, I think if you go about 8 centimeters, and then we'll go to about 2.5, I think. Yeah, about 2.5, so 8 by about 2.5, thereabouts. But as I say, I didn't initially measure the first one. So this is going to go across here, and then in fact I might do this one a bit lower, something a little bit different. It shows off a little bit more of our leaves here. So the first thing I want to do is add some linen thread to it. So the way I do that is I tend to give myself a little bit of sticky either side. By doing that, it just enables your thread to stick to it rather than it sort of floating around, really. And I want to leave myself enough to tie a bow here, and I'm going to wrap it twice. And again, I need a piece just to be able to tie a little bow. So you see, by doing that, this is now stuck on the back. So if I need to adjust it, I can, but it will always be sort of in the right place. So I'm going to bring my ends over to here so that I can then attach this piece on here. Now what I did, because I wanted it to be on a 3D, I had to stick foam pads to the top and bottom rather than in the centre. So I'm just taking my foam pads and I'm just going to cut a few in half. So I'm just going to pull my linen thread out of the way here, and I'm just going to stick this where I want it to be placed. I'm just going to hold it up so I can make sure it's straight, which it is. So you can see that's going to hold that linen thread as well. Now, because the linen thread is quite fine, I can afford to tie it in a double knot without it being too bulky. So that's what I tend to do, just to hold it in place, so that it's nice and tight, but it's not going to damage my card at all. Okay, so that's tied in place. Now I just want to tie myself a bow. I was a bit over generous with my thread here. I'm just going to adjust that how I want it to be. And just trim my ends off there. Okay, so now I can actually glue this to my brush metallic and then onto my card front itself. So again, you can use wet glue, you can use tape, you can use stamping seal like I am here. This is just for ease, really. It's not so messy for me today. And also, if you use wet glue on metallics, it does tend to move around a bit more, so you just need to make sure it sticks nicely. Okay, so that's in place, and then I'm just going to stick it onto my card front. Okay, and then finally I just want to add some little leaves like I did here. So what I did was I took my original piece that I had and I just used the punches that come in the Gilded Autumn suite. So these are your autumn punch pack. So I need to just try and get some that are near my edges so that I can use some of it for future projects. That's my acorn. I don't think I'm going to be able to very well, so I'm going to just trim up here. So then I should be able to get in to do my sycamore or maple leaf. And then finally my acorn leaf here. those out of the way. So what I did with these, I just added these with some wet glue because I thought it was the easiest way to actually stick them down. So I'm going to grab a pair of tweezers, it's just easier to hold them. Just going to pop them in place. If you want to, you could add these on 3D foam as well. I used glue just because I thought it had quite a bit of 3D impact anyway. So just by adding a little bit of glue, it was just sufficient. And because they're layered, they do naturally sort of have a slight 3D-ness to them anyway. Okay, so just pop everything out of the way. So there we go, that's our Monday mashup for today. I hope you like it. As I say, this technique, this sort of scrappy technique is from Bruno Bertucci. It's been used all over, which is really good, really nice. I prefer the closer knit of these actual leaves because obviously you get that more impact, whereas there's quite a few gaps in here, but I think they're equally as pleasant. So I hope you like that, and thank you for watching today, and I will see you next week. Take care, bye.